So yes, I'm here to talk mostly about the role of users within the energy system. And just to build on the previous presentation, I think one of the things that has been fascinating about the IEA 2050, Net Zero 2050 report is realizing the extent to which, either directly or indirectly, that we need people to come with us on this journey of decarbonisation and the energy transition. And so I'll talk to that and then talk about the role of the user-centered energy systems TCP in doing that. Just a quick note, I think one of the challenges that we face is that the modeling work that was done at the IEA has shown us where we need to get to, but it doesn't tell us how we need to get there. And that's where I think the user-centered energy systems TCP can come and actually help countries understand what works, where, in what contexts for engaging people in this energy transition. So I think that's the kind of distinction between these presentations. So I'll jump in and talk through, particularly, I'll start with looking at this title I've chosen of No Decarbonisation Without Representation. So this is a direct allusion, if you like, to the famous saying in, I think, the US Civil War about no taxation without representation. And there it's saying that if you're going to impose upon society broadly, then the society needs to have a voice in how this occurs. And I think this is one of the distinctions that we see as we look at decarbonising the energy system. It follows immediately from the fact that we are moving towards far more low density, disaggregated energy sources, which pushes energy generation out into communities. And we ask them then both to give us the permission to install these systems, but we also ask that they often purchase technologies like heat pumps and electric vehicles, but also that they participate and they allow us as people on the energy side to potentially automate and control these resources to help manage the electrification of much of our energy system. So I'll talk through that, but for a start, there's two ways in which we can think about this question of representation. The first, and potentially the most obvious, is simply the fact that we are imposing upon people a radical change in the way we supply energy. And as we've seen, about 2/3 of all of this, of all of what's planned, will require some form of participation. The other thing we're seeing clearly is the rise of a new generation that does not trust us and will want to be very actively involved in ensuring we are acting and representing their interests about the future state of the planet. So I think when you look at this, this is a fundamental change in the way the energy system has been operating. It has effectively operated, if you like, behind the scenes, largely out of sight with large-scale centralized generation sources. But that's no longer going to be the case. And I think in order to carry with us the democratic mandate to change the system at this scale, we must have engagement with the people. And that's where I think we need their voice represented, and we need consultation processes, and we need them to give us the mandate to undertake this transition. So that's the first sense in which we mean representation. The second is more obscure, but actually incredibly important, I think. And this is one of the ways we think about this within the Users TCP. We often talk about socio-technical systems. So once we get to the scale of changing technologies at a national level, then technology and society are heavily intertwined. And we've seen this through a lot of work which has looked at issues around complexity in economic systems, of issues of lock-in and of path dependence, where effectively what happens is that the social structures that we have actually govern the kind of technologies that people will accept. Those technologies in turn shape how we act and the choices that we have. When we think about things like heating our homes or transport, we can only choose options that are part of that technological palette of possibilities that is presented to us. So those technologies shape our individual behavior. The other thing our social structures do is they shape our preferences. We tend to prefer technology systems with which we are familiar. When we see things like transitions from, particularly in the UK, things like gas-fired central heating to heat pumps, the way in which we see that transition pathway happening potentially is through things like hybrid heat pumps, where we bring together the capacity of gas boilers and heat pumps and create an experience for people which allows them to become familiar with new technologies and the way they operate and make that pathway easier for people to move along. So we have to think about the technological stepping stones that get us to where we want to go and the extent to which our current society shapes which of those kind of stepping stones people will find acceptable. So there's a big jump, say, from on the transportation side, moving from internal combustion engines to electrically powered vehicles. Then there is a transition to things like, potentially automated vehicles. And then we can move from automated vehicles towards other forms of transport, like more heavily dependent on public transport or active transport options. But it's about making the individual steps achievable by society. So these things feed into each other and shape the way we can take society with us. The other thing that's really important, and I'll link this back to the IEA presentation, is that, interestingly, we have images of the people we are trying to develop these technologies for. A really famous case is when we think about the heating of homes. All of the work that was developed around the temperatures that we expect people to find comfortable in homes was ultimately traced back to studies that were done on one 40-year-old white male. And we get these lock-in situations where we develop entire industries which are based on the kind of research that we do that create a very simplified image of what people want and how we can deliver that. And this is a trap we're finding ourselves in increasingly, where we are trying to automate services. If we put in a smart thermostat, we make assumptions about the type of services that people want. That is a problem that we see because the diversity of requirements of things like heating systems in homes is enormous. People do things like heat homes to look after their tropical fish. They use radiators to dry, washing on. Radiators are used as part of keeping mold out of unoccupied rooms. All of these different social functions are built into how people use them. And yet when we automate these, we don't allow for those multiple social functions and the differences in people in the images we embed in our automated systems. So one of the things we're interested in is how do these images of people that are implicit in our technologies and our policies, how well do they represent the diversity of people we see in the world? And how, if we change those images, can we better serve people's needs? Another example of this is the move away from assumptions about pure economic rationality, and that people will make decisions based purely on what is, the lowest levelized cost of energy, for example, through to understanding behavioral economics and behavioral psychology, and understanding that people have a vast number of different rationalities that dictate how they behave. There are social rationalities, there are family dynamics. All of these things affect people's decisions and responses, and we need to understand those and have the capacity to develop technologies that accommodate people's different motivations without simplifying them into very sort of stereotyped, characteristic, basic assumptions about how people respond to stimulus. So that's another way in which we mean no decarbonisation without better representation of people. So we're interested in the Users TCP about how these implicit images in our technologies and our policies impact on how people respond and how effectively these policies are taken up and used. We're interested in making the most effective policies we can. So to talk a little about the TCP, we have 6 active tasks. I know that you will have presentations around 2 of those on social license to automate and gender and energy. I'll talk a little bit about the others. We are really looking to be that TCP that takes the endpoints that the IEA has identified where we need to get to and understands how we get there, how we take people on these journeys. And we'll talk through some of the research that we're doing as we go. There's a lot of benefits, we think, in participating. International comparative analysis is probably the primary one of those. It's astonishing how diverse the different policy options and responses are in different countries. One I'll talk briefly about because it's partly work that I've been involved with. We've been involved in looking at tariff structures in Medellin in Colombia. There they have a social tariff, which is socially progressive. So depending on your socioeconomic strata, you pay different amounts for your energy. So if you're in the top socioeconomic strata, you pay up to 40% premium for your energy. And if you're in the lower one, you get about a 60% discount. That is regarded in Colombia as absolutely sensible and rational. But I had never come across something like that in a European context. And I think there's the benefit of international comparison, to understand that there are other ways we can think about the structuring of the distribution of impacts from transitions, and we can learn from each other's experience. So there's many benefits, but I think international comparative analysis was one of the strongest. We run a series called the User-Centered Energy Systems Academy, where we take leading speakers and thinkers around the role of users within the energy system, and we disseminate that through our YouTube channel. So that really helps spread the impacts of our research. We have a range of existing platforms. We have one on behavioral insights. So this is really coming back to some of what I was saying before and saying, how do we understand people act and what motivates them when we look through the lens of behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, and various other kind of behavioral science approaches. So that's gone through our first phases. We're looking at the fact that current programs have certain focus. So they look at simplifying information and framing it in certain ways. They look at feedback mechanisms, and we see that through things like smart metering programs and others. And they look at comparing people to their peer group and their social norm. So these are widely used, but there are other tools in the toolbox from behavioral insights that policymakers are not using. So we're not yet seeing in a policy context issues around gamification and positive competition. We're not seeing goal setting and commitment devices. We're not really seeing changes to product design. And I think very importantly, the default settings implicit in automated products that can have a really big impact. So this really helps us understand where the policy community is, which insights from behavioral science they're adopting and which they have yet to adopt. We have another program of research which is looking at hard to reach energy users. So this is started by trying to understand in different countries around the world which areas policymakers see as being hard to reach. And we see nearly all countries are looking at vulnerable households with the energy poor, with low income, particularly with intersections with housing and ethnic minority groups. And they're identified widely as hard to reach. But some societies are also identifying high income houses, high energy users, landlords and building operators as being hard to reach, perhaps because it's just simply a lower priority. So I think there's an interesting part of the policy focus that can look at these other sectors of hard to reach users and work out what policy tools we can engage to reach the people who are using the most energy, which is something we don't often think about. We have a global observatory, which is looking at the broad suite of local energy trading. We're now increasingly seeing this written into legislation, including in the European Union. And we're seeing some interesting lessons emerge from that. So one of the key lessons is do not leave the design of these local trading systems up to the market. Ultimately, we need strong policy direction about the outcomes that we want, which differ enormously from country to country and system to system, then allow the market to design solutions to deliver the outcomes that we need from a policy perspective. The design of these systems, if you're looking to minimize constraints on your distribution network, looks entirely different to if you're looking for a system that motivates people to purchase more batteries or more solar photovoltaic. So we need to know where we need to get before we let the market come in and design these systems. There's a whole range of other things that I think are quite important. One of the big ones is around network charging models. We need to think critically about how we financially cover the costs of the provision of networks. Who pays for that? There's a real risk that people will install PVs and batteries and withdraw from the system and then not pay for networks, which pushes the costs onto the least able to afford it. So there are social equity issues arising that need to be engaged with. Two more. We've just finished one, which is a project with the 4E TCP, looking at smart home technologies. Again, a range of really concrete findings that are emerging from that. But one of the ones I think in particular is, again, around how we integrate these technologies with other components of smart home systems. Currently, we're seeing little thought given to issues of interoperability within the suite of technologies that would be installed to create smart homes. So we need to look at interoperability. We need to look at issues around basically how you incentivize the use of these for the benefit of the grid. We need to look at the how we get more positive engagement. A lot of these, again, have very poor representations of end users' needs, and end users end up subverting them, working around them, trying to overcome the automation that's in them because they find them really frustrating to engage with. So there's a lot of usability issues that work at the level of the human interface with the technologies. And finally, we're just starting a new task. Well, we have a proposal for a new task before the TCP, which has come from the UK and is looking at issues of public engagement. So this takes us full circle back to the beginning. The real need to move to a situation where we are looking at public engagement, and we're looking beyond just information campaigns, but doing it in a way which actually facilitates the building of trust, helps develop fairer policies, raises awareness, but actually moves through that into civic empowerment. So this is looking at the various kind of public forums that can be established to get the views of people on the processes that we're taking them through. So again, this is really rooted in international collaboration, identifying shared informations and goals and objectives, and coming up with solutions. We're really interested in working out what can policymakers implement that we believe through evidence is effective. So thank you. I'll pause at that point and take any questions.